funk and hit them with the dirty headbanger 10-5 on the Richter. Back again this time with new members. It's a Cane's thing, we about to get with ya. Folks talking, they saying a whole lot. We bringing that straight fire to blow the whole spot. We keep the whole block locked like a fair pin and turn the game upside down like a head spin.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to CaneSport's Countdown to Kickoff as the Miami Hurricanes get ready to host their ACC opener against the Virginia Cavaliers Thursday night, primetime, ESPN. It's a game that you won't want to miss without question. Miami-Virginia games have a tendency to evolve like that. I'm Gary Ferman, the publisher of CaneSport.com, joined today by Damon Hillman from CavsCorner.com as we take a look at the way this game is going to shape up. And Damon, welcome to CaneSport's Countdown to Kickoff. And man, I got so many questions about about Virginia.
I hope I have answers.
Yeah, I'm loaded with them. I'll be honest with you. I've had a chance to watch Virginia a little bit this year, and I'm just like mesmerized by the development of quarterback Brennan Armstrong. I'm mesmerized by how this ground and pound offense has evolved into this passing machine. They're putting up ridiculous numbers, but they're not winning football games the way I'm sure they want to. 0-2 in the ACC right now. It has not gone well for them. So let's start at the beginning. Obviously, so much respect for Bronco Mendenhall as a coach. This is a guy that throughout his career has been a defensive mastermind, so to speak, who can't seem to get any production out of his defense now. Tell us what's happened to Virginia on defense.
Yeah, and I think that is very much a source of frustration for Bronco Mendenhall and the coaching staff at this point. Just even go back to last year, they have not been able to avoid giving up those big plays. And when you look at the statistics defensively, obviously they've given up a lot of yards and they've given up a lot of points. And so going back to last year, they struggled so much that they did a lot of self-scouting and a lot of self-evaluation in the offseason. And they made they made some tweaks to the coaching staff in terms of roles, in terms of position assignments for the position coaches. They put more of an emphasis on the defensive backfield with some of those tweaks to the coaching staff. They went out and recruited a couple of grad transfer cornerbacks, Anthony Johnson from Louisville, Josh Hayes from North Dakota State, who they thought could bring in some competition at the very least and some depth to the defensive backfield, if not upgrade the defensive backfield. And then they tweaked the scheme to a bit more of a 3-3-5 this year. I mean, obviously, pretty much everybody in college football plays a lot of these 5-6 defensive back sub packages, but UVA is really dedicated to it this year. They've gone away from the 3-4 that's been the base defense for the first couple of years, the first 5 years since Bronco has been here. And really, basically, the 3-3-5 has been their base defense this year. And first couple of games, it looked good. William and Mary, they shut them out. Didn't even break 200 yards passing. And then week 2, Illinois, same thing. They didn't break 300 yards, not passing, total offense for William and Mary. But week 2, Illinois also was sub 300 total yards until a drive at the end of the game that was virtually meaningless when that game was all but over, just running out the clock. So those first couple of games, you think, okay, these tweaks have worked. And then they went down to Chapel Hill 2 weeks ago. And obviously everybody saw how things got out of hand pretty quickly in that game. They gave up 699 total yards. That's the most a Bronco defense has ever given up at BYU or at UVA. It was a yard away from being the first game in UVA history for an opposing team to put up 700 yards of total offense. And then Wake Forest last week, Wake Forest kind of took their foot off the pedal in the fourth quarter when that game was in hand, or those offensive numbers probably would have been a little bit more unsightly as well. UVA actually outgained them in that game, but a lot of that was a product of UVA trying to make plays late while Wake Forest was sort of running out the clock and calling off the dogs with the big lead. So, yeah, a lot of the issues, they had no sacks last week against Wake Forest, didn't force a turnover. That's the first time since I think it's 2018 that a UVA defense didn't do either of those things in a game. Couldn't get off the field on third down. They were 7-12. Wake Forest was 7 of their first 12 on third downs. And a lot of those third downs that they didn't convert, they either converted on fourth down or they kicked field goals. So they scored on their first 7 possessions of the game last week, 4 touchdowns and 3 field goals. You go back to the second half in Carolina. Carolina scored touchdowns on all 5 of their possessions in the second half of that game in Chapel Hill 2 weeks ago. So UVA's defense went a stretch of 12 straight possessions where they couldn't get off the field. They gave up points, either touchdowns or field goals. That streak finally ended when Wake Forest punted in the fourth quarter, when they basically, like I said, were running out the clock. That was the first time UVA had forced a defense to punt since the Illinois game 2 weeks ago. So yeah, they're not making those big plays. They're not getting those negative plays that put the opposing offense in 3rd and long, in 2nd and long, even forcing them to make plays. And they're not forcing those havoc plays, as the coaching staff has nicknamed them, those turnovers, those sacks, those disruptive plays. And opposing offense has been a little bit too comfortable and have been able to convert and hit on big plays. And it results. You can see it in the scoreboard. You can see it in the stat sheet. They're just not making the plays they need to, and they're not getting off the field. And as a result, they've been playing from behind these last couple of weeks.
So the number I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, 16 of the last 17 possessions, the other team has scored on Virginia's defense. Is that the correct number?
Well, if you take away Wake's last 3 possessions, they punted. They were 3 and out and punted. But like I said, the game was out of hand by that point. But if you go back before then yeah, that sounds right. 16 out of 17, because it was all 5 in Carolina. And then in the first half, Carolina's last 2 possessions in the first half of that game, the clock ran out. They basically ran out the clock. And prior to that, they attempted a field goal. It was a 54-yarder. It was a long one, and missed it. But prior to that, Carolina scored on all of their possessions. And they had an interception in there too. I'm sorry. But Carolina's first 4 possessions, 24 points, 3 touchdowns and a field goal, they scored on all of those as well. So yeah, starting with that Carolina game, the last 2 games, they've just been unable to get off the field, and opposing offenses have been able to convert on 3rd downs and put up points.
So that's got to be driving Broncos.
Oh yeah. And Nick Howell, the defensive coordinator. Absolutely. Yeah. They're clearly searching for answers.
And, just to give people perspective on this, Virginia is a team that won the Coastal a couple years ago. They thought they had turned the corner as a program, and it was going to elevate their recruiting and everything else. And it hasn't turned out that way. They went 5-5 last year, now 2-2 to start this year. And without question, come to Miami at a crossroad.
Yeah.
I mean, they're pretty much out of the Coastal race. I mean, it would be a pipe dream to think they're going to go through the rest of their conference schedule and win every game. And searching is probably an appropriate word there. All right, so let's focus in for a minute. Let's assume Miami's going to do a good job on offense in this game. Miami's going to score points. If Virginia's going to be in this game, it's going to be in a shootout. Let's assume that for the sake of this show, because that's what's most likely.
I think it's a pretty fair assumption given.
Well, Miami's defense is not doing considerably better, and this style of offense that Virginia plays is definitely not conducive to where Miami's strengths are. So this game figures to have a lot of points, and if you like points, folks, make sure if you're local, you get yourself out to Hard Rock on Thursday night, because there's going to probably be some offense going up and down the field in this game. All right, so for Virginia, it starts with Brennan Armstrong. And we saw him last year, and he was sort of coming into his own as a quarterback. Didn't jump off the page or anything. He showed some good things here or there, but was nothing like the beast that he has evolved into this year. And just to throw out some of the numbers against Wake Forest on Friday night, he hit on 33 of 59 passes, 407 yards. Against Carolina, he had 554 passing yards in a loss. He's averaging 426 yards a game, has 13 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. This is a guy that last year had 18 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. So he's already, in the first 4 games this year, eclipsed his touchdown output of a year ago. Damon, what happened? How did this guy in the span of 9 months turn into this type of monster quarterback? I
mean, just to put those numbers in a little bit more perspective, coming into this season, UVA football history, program history, they'd had 3 400-yard passing games ever in program history. And Armstrong's done that in each of the last 3 games. So he has doubled the total in program history in just the last 3 games, and he has half of them. So, but yeah, I mean, it's just, he talked a lot in the preseason in camp about how he put a lot of emphasis on being better before the snap at the line and figuring out what the opposing defense is trying to do. He put a lot of emphasis on being more decisive, getting the ball out quicker, being, like I said, more decisive with that decision making. And I mean, he said he worked on those things. He clearly put a lot of time in all of those things because he just looks, he's a guy who's at least, I don't want to say he's taken another step. He's taken maybe another step and a half, almost 2 steps as a quarterback from last year. His accuracy is just so, some of the throws he makes across his body on the move. And a lot of these aren't dink and dunk throws either. These are 10, 12, 15 yards down the field, and they're right where they need to be. They're right in spots where only his guy along the sideline or up top, where only his guy can go and get them. He has a couple of big targets. Ilani Woods, the tight end, is 6'7". Tavion Wix, Keaton Thompson, Rayshon Henry. Those guys are all big receivers, and those guys are able to go up and get it. So he's able to put the ball in positions where they've been able to win those one-on-one balls. But yeah, his decision-making and his accuracy have just improved so much from last year to this year. Fewer turnovers. He's thrown a couple of interceptions, but most of those have been, he's thrown one in each game. The one in Illinois was a jump ball that Keaton Thompson probably should have come down with. The one in Carolina was in the second half when they were scrambling to try to come back. And then same thing last week against Wake Forest, another one when they were trying to scramble to come back. And it just wasn't a great decision. But he's been a better quarterback compared to last year when they've been trailing as well, because that was probably his biggest shortcoming as a quarterback last year, was he would just try to do too much when they get into these early holes. You look at the Carolina game, they were down 24-7 early in the second quarter, and by halftime they'd come back to take the lead in that game. Obviously got away from them again in the second half, but that was through no fault of Armstrong in the offense. So he's just, like I said, his decision-making, his accuracy, his ability to cut back on the turnovers that were a problem for him last year, those are the things that he wanted to work on. And through these first 4 games, he has absolutely shown that he's much improved in all of those areas. And I think those numbers and the play, the guys, the weapons on the offense too, those playmakers I talked about, some of the other guys too, they've done a good job of getting open and making plays after the catch as well to help boost those numbers. So it's just an offense that has been able to put guys in position to make plays, and they've been able to do that by and large, especially the first 3 games. Wake did a good job of minimizing the big plays and getting after Armstrong a little bit more, sacked him 6 times. But yeah, he's just improved in a lot of those areas that I mentioned.
So the last time we saw Virginia, they almost had no offense at all. I mean, it was kind of like a hodgepodge of all kinds of crazy stuff and weirdly designed quarterback runs and just no clear scheme.
There's still some of that, not to cut you off, but there's still a lot of that, a lot of the stuff where sometimes to their own detriment. We saw a lot of it early. It took them a while to get going against William & Mary in the opener. They only put up 53 yards in the first quarter against William & Mary. Their only 3 points came on a big punt return that set them up for the field goal because they seem to shoot themselves in the foot. The opening drive last week against Wake, they were moving the ball and then started running a lot of that odd stuff that you were talking about too. It's almost like Robert and I, the offensive coordinator, can't resist the urge sometimes. But there's still a lot of that. It's when they kind of get away from that a little bit and get away from being a little too cute and get back to kind of what works. When they start getting back to what works, it works. And it keeps working. But like I said, it just seems like there are times when they just can't resist getting a little too cute for themselves.
Well, it looks to me like they have a hard time protecting Armstrong. He was sacked 6 times on Friday, has been sacked 12 times this season. It also looks like at times they get a little too over-reliant on the passing game. They have a 180 to 114 pass to run ratio, which is crazy for Virginia.
Yeah.
There's not a running back on the roster that's rushed for 100 yards on the season, much less than a game, or even has 17 attempts on the season. It's that 4 games in, not a running back with 17 carries. I mean, that's a little crazy. Now, I know that Wayne Talapapa was out on concussion protocol last game, and that's a big deal for Virginia. I mean, he's probably their best running back right now. Will he be back for Miami?
We have not gotten any kind of confirmation. We talked to Bronco this morning, and he said he didn't have any injury updates on anyone. So we'll find out on Thursday night at Hard Rock. But to your point about the running game, this is another example. Number one, you have to factor in, especially in Carolina and Wake Forest, they dug themselves in early 2 touchdown holes or bigger than that. And so they kind of leaned on the passing game to get back into those games. But number two, it was the same story last year as well, where a lot of their rushing yards came from unconventional sources. Last year, a lot of it, Armstrong was the team's leading rusher last year. He has not been as much of a factor in the run game this year. He hurt his right leg. Not sure what it was. They haven't said what the injury was specifically, but he got hurt in the third quarter of the Illinois game, and he wasn't really as mobile the rest of that game or the Carolina game because of that injury. He looked like he was back to full speed or closer to it, certainly last week against Wake Forest. But Keaton Thompson's a guy who's listed as a quarterback / wide receiver who they really want to get involved in the running game. Jacob Rodriguez is a true freshman who's listed as a quarterback, but he's a guy that they've used a lot. He led them in rushing at Carolina 2 weeks ago. He's a guy that they're getting on the field more. Same with their backup quarterback, Ira Armstead. They've run the ball with him. It's almost like they prefer these dual threat quarterbacks as running backs more than they prefer a lot of their actual running backs in the offense at times, it seems like. Now, Mike Hollins is listed as the number 2 running back. He got the start with Talapapa out last week. He made some plays. He broke a few. He's the guy who the expectation is, that he's the guy who's the biggest threat to maybe break one. We haven't really seen that from him. We haven't really seen that from anybody in the UVA running game, with the exception of Bryce Perkins the last few years, his 2 years as the quarterback in 2018 and 2019. They haven't really had a big play threat as a runner since he's been gone, but it's definitely an unconventional run game. They talked in the summer, in the spring, in the offseason about getting back to more of the traditional run game, taking a little bit of the burden off Brennan Armstrong, taking a little bit of the burden off the pass game. They talked about that a lot in the summer, but we just have not seen that these first 4 games. And to your point, I don't know if we will, especially if Talapapa is not available again on Thursday night, because they like I said earlier, they just seem to get enamored with some of the fancier stuff that they have in the playbook. And it comes at the expense, absolutely, of those traditional runs that they wanted to put more of an emphasis on coming into the year.
All right, so from the outside looking in, I'm looking at Virginia, and I'm saying, all right, how did this happen? Where did this great transformation come from? And my eyes go right to this wide receiver stable that is simply better than what they've had in the recent past. And I know it starts with Billy Kemp, their best receiver returning from last year. A guy that had 644 yards last year and already has 25 catches this year. I know about him. I know about Tavion Wix, who has the capability of getting open deep. They look to him for big plays. He's averaging more than 20 yards per reception. But when I watch Virginia, the place where my eye goes very quickly is to this kid playing tight end.
I knew it.
Ilani Woods. What's he, like 6'7"?
6'7", 270, yeah.
Yeah, came from Oklahoma. I'm not quite sure what happened to him at Oklahoma.
Oklahoma State.
Oh, Oklahoma State, okay.
He was originally a quarterback at Oklahoma State, which is even wilder.
Yeah, well, I don't know how they let him get away, but this kid can flat play, and he's got an incredible catch radius, and like you said, Armstrong can throw it up to him, and most DBs are not going to be able to match that radius that he can bring to the table. The way Miami's linebackers cover, the struggles that the safeties have been having so far this season, I think Ilani Woods is the key to the game for Virginia. I think that their game plan has got to be heavily loaded in his direction, I would think, when they're sitting there scheming that heading into Thursday's game.
Yeah, which would absolutely – the Illinois game, for instance, he didn't have a very big game. There was a lot of anticipation for what he was going to look like going into the William & Mary game. And he had some cramping issues, some issues in that game, didn't play a whole lot. And then the first possession of the Illinois game, they got him involved immediately. He had a 31-yard catch on the first play from scrimmage, and then 3 or 4 plays later capped the drive with a 32-yard touchdown. and guys are just bouncing off of him. He's such a threat. Not only is he that size to go up and get it, but he's also, guys, we saw it on his touchdown catch against Wake Forest. Defenders just kind of bounce off of him, deflect off of him sometimes, and he's a big threat. He's got some speed too. He's deceptively fast for 6'7", 265 or 270. So he's a threat to catch and run, pick up those yards after catch. So he's absolutely across the middle of a vital part of this UVA offense. And I think what has happened too is, as defenses have been forced to pay more attention to him, that has opened things up on the outside. You mentioned Tavion Wix. He's the other guy putting up all the big numbers. He was hurt all of last season. I think they had high hopes for what he could add to this offense last year as a sophomore before he got hurt in camp. But it's kind of opened things up for Wix. It's opened things up for Billy Kemp, who had the big game at North Carolina. And it's just kind of like, pick your poison. Which of these guys do you want to focus on? And that's another example of what Armstrong's done a good job of, is when a defense takes one of those guys away, he targets the guy who is sort of more free, who's been made a little bit more available because of those decisions that the defense has made. But yeah, I think having a presence like that, like Ilani Woods in the middle of the offense, has absolutely put a lot of pressure on opposing defenses and has helped Armstrong and the rest of this offense for sure.
All right, so everything's coming up roses except the run game on offense for Virginia, and that figures to be the pattern that they bring into Hard Rock on Thursday night. But I mentioned at the beginning of the show the problems they're having on defense. While the offense averages 35.3 points and 546 yards, the defense is allowing an average of 27.5 and 423. Few too many yards, let's be honest. Although it is better, and that's the crazy thing. It's better than what they were doing last year when they were giving up 442 a game. So on one hand, it seems like they've improved a slight bit, but on the other hand, they're getting blown off the field by explosive plays by the offenses they're going against.
Well, I think a lot of those improved numbers too are a product of especially the William & Mary game the first week of the season when they shut out William & Mary. Because that William & Mary team, first of all, even coming into the game, that was a William & Mary team that was picked 11th out of 12 teams in the CAA. And that was even before you factor in that their starting quarterback didn't play, their top running back didn't play, and they were missing their longtime starter at left tackle. So that was a William & Mary team that, to be blunt, gave off the vibe that they just wanted to get through that game and onto their actual schedule. They were just trying to keep the guys they did have on the field healthy, and they didn't do a whole lot to challenge the UVA defense at all. Like I mentioned at the top, they didn't break 200 yards of total offense in that game. If you take away the stats from that game out of those averages, UVA's defensive numbers are a whole lot worse, particularly the last two games since they've been in ACC play against Carolina and Wake. And Bronco admitted after the UNC game that a lot of that was simply a product of, that's not a very good Illinois team either. That's an Illinois program that's in the early stages of a rebuilding process under Brett Bielema. And like Bronco said, the step up in class from William & Mary in Illinois to the guys that the playmakers and the threats that Carolina has on offense, and Wake Forest, that offense, they've been putting up 40 points a game, 40 points a game this year, 30 points a game the last 4 or 5 years. Only Clemson has averaged more points a game the last 5 years than Wake Forest. So they may not have the flashy players or the guys in the NFL that some of these other programs do, but that's a potent offense that Dave Clawson has at Wake Forest as well. Coached. Yeah, absolutely. He's a great coach. Yeah. And so I think a lot of it, we'll see what those numbers look like after Miami. I know there are questions about who Miami's quarterback will be on Thursday night, but they've got playmakers too, and they like to get those guys in space. And if they're able to do that, teams have been able to do that against UVA. Carolina was able to do that all over the field against UVA. Wake Forest didn't hit it on as many big plays, but they got enough of them as well to pull away from UVA here on last Friday night. So yeah, I mean, you look at those numbers, but they do come with the caveat of they played some really struggling teams those first couple of the weeks of the season. And now it's almost as if now that they're in ACC play, reality is set in to a certain extent.
All right, so the forces are going to collide, and we'll see who can score enough points here on Thursday night to get ahead on the scoreboard. It's going to be fun. Before I let you go, I do want to ask you a quick question about North Carolina. Since you had the chance to watch Virginia play against them, it's Miami's next opponent, a team that also is not very happy, I think, with how their defense is playing, and they're having a hard time with that fact. What did you see from North Carolina when Virginia played them?
I mean, that offense, obviously Sam Howell is the straw that stirs the drink with that offense, but they just did a really good job of exploiting whatever mistakes UVA made defensively. And obviously they made a lot of them that night in Chapel Hill. But from the first play from scrimmage, Josh Downs, the receiver, just so much speed. And the first play, the first series, the touchdown on the first series, I don't know if I've ever seen a guy as wide open as he was. And obviously some of that was a product of a breakdown defensively from UVA. But then once he got the ball, he was gone. The speed that he had, and they have players like that all over the offensive side of the ball. Now defensively, you go back and UVA was able to move the ball on them. Like I mentioned earlier, UVA got in the 24-7 hole in the second quarter and was able to come back and take the lead. Even while they were one-dimensional, the running game was virtually non-existent for UVA in that game. And yet Armstrong was able to hit on all the throws he was trying to make all night long. They didn't put a whole lot of pressure on Armstrong. Like I mentioned, he wasn't able to move around all that well because of the leg injury, but they still didn't put a whole lot of pressure on him. They didn't bring a whole lot of heat. UVA's protection was a whole lot better in that game than it was against Wake Forest. But yeah, I mean, I was surprised to see what happened with Carolina and Georgia Tech last week. I wasn't surprised that Georgia Tech was able to move the ball on them. I was surprised to the extent that they were able to move the ball and put points on them, especially because I thought Carolina would be able to glean a few things from what UVA was able to do and make the necessary adjustments. And they clearly were not able to do that. So maybe that's a Carolina team that has some of the same issues as UVA does. They have an offense that can put up points and probably is going to need to put up points the rest of the way if their defense isn't going to be able to stop anybody. Because I mean, that game in Chapel Hill 2 weeks ago, that UVA Carolina game 2 weeks ago, was like watching somebody play PlayStation. It was like watching somebody play NCAA football. I don't know if I'll ever see another game like that, the way both teams just went back and forth all night long. And so, yeah, clearly defense is an issue. Miami's got a chance here. If they can get their offense going, they've got a chance here to pick up a couple of wins because UVA's defense is down and Carolina's defense is clearly down as well. So there's an opportunity here.
But I keep telling everybody, I'm dead serious. The fan base has been really down because of the loss to Michigan State. And then, of course, the fact that Miami was non-competitive against Alabama. But there's an opportunity in the ACC right now with Clemson down a little bit and, no really clear-cut favorite in the Coastal.
It's wide open. I mean, I know it's always wide open, but it's wide open.
It's wide open, and that's an opportunity for the Hurricanes if they can continue to progress here this season. So we'll see what happens beginning Thursday night. He's Damon Hillman from CavsCorner.com. Thank you so much for joining us on CaneSport's Countdown to Kickoff. Appreciate the insight into Virginia, and we'll see what happens on Thursday night at Hard Rock Stadium. So until next time, thank you for joining us. Goodbye, everybody.